Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Inclusive Insights podcast, where we bring you conversations that challenge, inspire, and celebrate the human experience in leadership, culture, and storytelling. I'm your host, Neetu Razdan, and today's episode is truly special. I'm thrilled to introduce Kalpana Raina, a trailblazer in corporate world, a champion of global literature, and one of the brilliant minds behind the English translation of For Now, It's Night by the Kashmiri writer Hari Krishna Kaul. In this episode, we will explore Kalpana's inspiring professional journey, her work advocating for global literature, and her incredible contribution to translating a seminal work of Kashmiri fiction. Kalpana, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Neetu. I'm really thrilled to be here and I'm looking forward to this conversation very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We are looking forward to the conversation as well. How about, Kalpana, we start with your professional journey, where it began? I'm just so intrigued by the fact that, from becoming EVP at BNY Mellon to being the first woman on color, of color to hold this title, to your work on public boards. You have broken barriers and paved the way for many others. Can you share what drew you to the corporate world, and then what drew you away from that into nonprofits and other organizations?
Sure. I mean, it's quite a journey, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit.
Sure.
Um, I mean, I was pursuing a PhD in English literature when I decided that academics was really not for me. And I was exploring just recently moved to New York as well. And so I was exploring other opportunities. And I initially thought they would be adjacent to my experiences and my education, so adjacent to literature like publishing or, excuse me, advertising or something like that. And I met with literally hundreds of people trying to figure out what I should do next. And somehow or the other, and mostly by chance, as it usually is, I found myself interviewing for a management training program at a major bank in the city in New York. And when I was offered the job to come on as a management trainee and as an analyst, I took it because by this time I was so tired of meeting people and figuring out what I wanted to do. Is like, okay, I'll take the first job that comes my way and then I'll figure it out. And these things just really happen by chance, honestly, as I said. And I so enjoyed that transition from the literature background to the corporate world because, again, as luck would have it, I started this journey at a time when banks were getting into creating groups around media, internet, telecommunications, entertainment, financing, knowing their distinctive qualities and knowing that they required dedicated people who understood the industry and understood the ways to finance it and its opportunities. And I just happened to be, as I came out of the training program, I happened to be assigned to one of these groups. And I just fell in love with the industry because it's challenging, it's interesting, it's constantly shifting. Gosh, even the technology changes that I've seen in the 30 years or so since I did this have just been amazing. And every time there was a change, there were new opportunities, new things to learn. And that, I think, because I'm by nature a curious person who likes to keep learning, that really kept me intrigued with this. And so it was easy to stay here. And I had most of my career at the Bank of New York Mellon. And as I started going up the ranks and started taking on management responsibilities, it just became, I never forgot literature, but this was my life for about 20 years. And I enjoyed it really thoroughly, not only because of the people I met, both as clients and otherwise, but because my responsibilities kept growing. I became a team leader. I headed up the division. Then I was given responsibilities internationally. And everything just kind of converged in a really good way.
That's amazing. What did it mean to you personally, professionally, to be at such a senior role in such a big bank, right? At that point in time.
Yeah, I think again, there were a lot of interesting things along the way. The transition that I made was only possible at that time. I don't think it would be possible now. You have much more specialized roles, and everyone needs an MBA. I haven't even taken an economics course. So for me, it was a huge seismic shift. And then to get promoted and become the first person of color, not just the first woman, but the first person of color
Person
at
of
the
color.
bank to become an EVP was, I don't think at that point in time I recognized what it meant. It was just
Mm-hmm.
another big promotion. And I was very happy about it. It's just looking back now as we, um, with the perception, sorry, the perspective of hindsight and the journey up until now that you realize that it was a pretty momentous thing. And I think I give the bank, of course, I did well and I was rewarded, but I also give the bank a lot of credit for recognizing my contributions and not holding me back because there had been no one like me before. I was unusual for the bank. I came from a literature background,
Mm-hmm.
no MBAs, but they really let me run with the ball, as they say, and do things my way. And I give them a lot of credit for allowing me to grow and to promote me. What did it really mean? At that point, I don't think I understood what it meant. But interestingly, as I was thinking about it later, I realized that what it showed me was as you keep going up in an organization, the decision makers become a smaller and smaller group.
Mm-hmm.
And fitting into that group, being an outsider and trying to fit into that group was not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it was because people tried to exclude me or didn't want me in that group. It was just a recognition of looking around the table and seeing that there's no one like me here. There's no one with my background. There's no one with my skin color. There's no one with my instincts, not, my educational experience. And not letting that stop you from contributing is a big step to take, understanding that even though you're different, you have stuff to say and you have stuff that's important and you have a perspective and experiences that are important, and trying to work your voice into that small group of decision makers was challenging and interesting. But I have to say that again, I think I was lucky in a lot of ways because I I ended up with a lot of very strong people who were my mentors and sponsors at the bank, and they were fair people, but they also recognized capabilities and performance when they saw it. But they were supportive of me and they were supportive of my teams, and more importantly, they had my back. And I think when I still reflect on this, I think that's what made a huge difference and allowed me to be as successful as I was.
Yeah, I mean, I think your guides and mentors are super important, particularly the sponsors at work. So when you were talking about, it just happened. I was like, oh my God, this journey kind of is one of a kind. It had all the, positives. You just kind of took a step and another, and it just happened. But then when you talked about being the first, not only the female, but the first woman of color to be in, senior level position, it doesn't hit you at that point, but later on you kind of realize, what it really means. But then the challenges of feeling different, challenges of kind of thinking, oh my God, I don't fit the room, but yet I have a lot to kind of contribute to this group. I think to me as a leader, when I think about it, it could be, gut shaking. It's really unnerving, kind of being in that room and being like different, right?
It is, and like, and sorry, my throat's a little dry today. It is unnerving, but I think the challenge is to not let yourself both get carried away with it. Oh, I'm the first person to be here, and isn't this a great thing? And recognizing that you've earned this and you have a right to be there, which doesn't come easily. You have to teach yourself
Yeah.
that you have a right to be there, especially for women, and especially I think of women from our part of the world. It doesn't come easy, but you have to have faith in yourself and confidence. But you also, in a very strange way, even though you don't fit in, you have to fit in. You have to find ways to fit in so that you don't stand out like a sore thumb. You know, people are not going to deal with you. And I found this up and down the line in my corporate career. If they don't, if you don't fit in some way, you have to make an attempt to fit in.
Fit in.
And the challenge, I think, is to preserve your individuality, preserve what makes you different, but to make people comfortable around you. And that's one step I think that sometimes people forget about, that no one's going to do business with you unless they're comfortable with you. And so that's a very, very narrow, interesting path that you have to navigate. And it makes it harder when you're a person of color and from a different background. But I think, again, going back to, I think my mentors, my seniors, people I work with, were all so extremely supportive that at that time, I didn't think too much of it, but reflecting on it now, I realized that it was very important part of my life.
Yeah, I think this is great advice for all women of color, or women in general who are just starting their career, or kind of right there where they're about to step into bigger roles. I think this is great advice. You have to kind of um, you know fit in, and you have to understand the environment you are in, kind of know the people for what they are, and everything else kind of falls in place. I think that's great advice. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your work in the world of literature. That's just a whole another facet of you, which I'm so excited to talk about. So you have been a vital part of Words Without Borders, right? An organization that is dedicated to amplifying literary voices across cultures and languages. Can you tell us about your involvement with the organization and why this mission is so important to you?
Yeah, no, the mission, the mission and the organization are very important to me. And I think I joined the board, I think in 2009, 2010, just as I was transitioning away from my corporate career, and I had filled the intervening years with board positions and advisory positions. But I think in a way I was looking back to get back to my literature roots, which really is what I'm passionate about. I mean, I enjoyed my 20 years in the corporate world enormously, and that gave me a lot of confidence and a lot of exciting ideas and a lot of interesting experiences. But I was looking for ways. I didn't want a full-time job. I had 3 or 4 board positions that were keeping me busy, and I was looking for ways to connect back. Again, not consciously, but I'm pretty sure that I was looking for ways to connect back to literature. And I found this organization just scrolling on the web, realized that
Well,
they promoted international voices. And again, going back to how I found my corporate job, I decided to research it and see who was on the board and who I knew, and go and talk to them and go to other people. That it's a small organization, it was even smaller then, but it really caught my eye. And as I was talking to people there and people around the organization who knew it, its history became really interesting to me. It was started in 2003, really as a result. Again, these things are not conscious, but America invaded Iraq, and there was a recognition among some very sensitive, intelligent people, women in the publishing world, that this was a good moment to kind of step out of the isolationism that defined America, and not see the rest of the world as an enemy, but bring ways of showcasing the rest of the world and its contributions and its humanity, and it's essential humanity, I would say, because we're all essentially the same at some gut level, to Americans. And what better way to do it than through promoting literature from around the world? Because, I mean, for all of us who've read literature from other countries, we know that that's a great way of getting experiences outside of our own boundaries, outside of our own boundaries. It's a way of getting outside of your head and into someone else's head, into someone else's culture, into someone else's way of thinking, into someone else's way of being, and into someone else's way of expressing that state of being, that state of living, which can sometimes be so different. And the benefits of that, I mean, I'm sounding like a preacher here, but to me, this is so important because the benefits of that result in empathy, result in tolerance, result in understanding, all of which was the hope when Words Without Borders was started, that it would help create a bridge for Americans to the rest of the world. And I'll throw in a few stats here because I think they're important. Of all the books that are published in the US, translated literature and translation only accounts, still in the single digits. I'm not sure if it's 5% or 7%. It's that small.
Wow.
And when you start to think and say that the bulk of that 5 or 7, 6 or 7% is made up of translations from French, German, Spanish, and Italian. Well, there's a lot of other literatures around the world. There's a lot of other countries around the world. There's a lot of other languages that, and when I say America, I really mean the Anglophone world, the English-speaking world. There's a lot of other literatures and languages that the English-speaking world has not been exposed to. And that's what Words Without Borders' mission is, to bring these literatures and languages to the English-speaking world, to broaden our horizons beyond. We all know of great books published outside of English, but the opportunity to read them is limited unless we can find good translators. A lot of us have read Marquez and other major Spanish writers, but when we're reading them, we're really not reading Garcia Marquez. We're reading his translator.
Translator,
Her
correct.
translator. And the translator plays a special role in this sort of navigation here, I think. And that's what Words Without Borders does really, really well and has been doing for the last 20 years. And I just want to say it is the premier online journal of translation. And its archives have about 6,000 writers, about 146 languages, and from everything from French, German, Italy to indigenous languages from South America, from Indonesia, even the indigenous languages of Canada and the US. So it's a huge archive, and it's committed to raising awareness, not just for marginalized languages, but to give you an example, the recent Nobel Prize winner for literature, the South Korean writer Han King, was first published in English in Words Without Borders.
It's amazing.
And 9 Nobel laureates in our times have been first published in English. Their first translations into English were published in Words Without Borders. So it's an organization that really punches above its weight, but stays true to its mission for opening a door, opening access to the English from people from the English-speaking world to other parts of the world. And in addition to that, we have a program which I'm very, very proud of. It's called the Campus Program, which is taking world literature into classrooms, into schoolrooms, and training and with multimedia content and with teacher manuals and teachers training, exposing children in schools early on to reading in from other languages. Of course, they're still reading in English, but they have an
Mm.
insight now into other cultures. That's which is very, very important. So yeah, so it's as you can tell, I'm very, very excited about this organization and what it's done and what we hope to do. We have many new things happening. In fact, you'll find this interesting. We're starting at campus, we're just starting a new India unit, which will take a little while to put together, but it'll cover the many diverse regions of India away from the Hindi speaking or the Bengali speaking languages that most people are familiar with, but will go into the Northeast, hopefully into Kashmir, and kind of showcase some of these many, many languages and the rich literature from these languages that we have in India.
Yeah. Oh my God. You got me so excited with all this information. First of all, the stats are incredible, and the purpose and the mission behind this organization is, I think, amazing. I feel it's a vehicle not only to break borders and bring people closer together, but also familiarize each other with their cultures, kind of build empathy. And that's what my next question is with this the campus program you are doing. Do you feel that it's going to foster some form of empathy and understanding across cultures, across borders? Because, in any university or in any college, you will see kids coming from all parts of the world. Do you feel that this campus program is going to kind of like shift the mindset and have kids have some appreciation for other cultures?
Well, I mean that's its mission, and I think the idea is if you start when they're young, you have a better, you have a better way of reaching them. But it's not just. I mean, it is about exposing, and it's at the school level right now, exposing school children to other cultures. But one of the interesting things that's happening is that, say like New York City schools, there are kids from immigrant communities all over the world. And
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, some of them are getting an understanding of their own culture through this program. So if you're talking about a Mexican writer or a Dominican writer or a Palestinian writer or someone like that, this is the first exposure that these kids have, because a lot of them don't speak their native tongues anymore. This is the first exposure they have to understanding the cultures that their families and they come from,
That's
and
beautiful.
installing hopefully a sense of pride in where they come from and what they have to give and
Yeah.
contribute.
Yeah, this is amazing. You're talking about it's like, know your own self first before you appreciate anybody else. This is a great angle. I didn't even think about it. Thanks for kind of explaining that. So is there a particular story or project or, translation work within Words Without Borders that stands out to you personally, is your favorite?
Well, I mean, there's lots, so I don't want to pick one. I think there's, the issues now have themes, and I think two of the recent themes have been very well received. One is a theme of prison writing, writing from prisons around the world, collecting those writings in different languages and showcasing them. And the magazine just recently won an award for that, a
Wow.
humanitarian award, a European award for that. And that's a very interesting concept, taking incarcerated people from around the world and showcasing their writings, and not just in the English speaking world, but all over the world. I think the other thing that's interesting and where the magazine can make a difference is, most of the time you think about regions of the world in conflict and you say you have to showcase literature from that so as to bring it to a global awareness and make people understand. A very recent issue showcased Jordan, which is one of the more stable places in the
Mm-hmm.
Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time is not, its literature is not well known in the Anglophone world. But what it also does, and these are my words, it also does is shows you that, the good literature doesn't just have to come from places of conflict. Good literature can come from a place of hope and peace and
Mm-hmm.
all the good things. There are problems with Jordan, but there's also great literature, and it's been it's such a it's hardly known in the Anglophone world, and to be able to bring that to English readers has been really gratifying.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I like the whole thought of people writing from different prisons and you guys kind of publishing it. That's really cool. Those stories I would love to read. Um, let's kind of shift gears and talk about uh, your project, um, which was For Now It's Night. So you ready to dive into it?
Yes, I'd love
Yes.
to dive into it.
Sure. So from what I understand, it's an extraordinary collection of stories by Hari Krishna Kaul, a writer deeply connected to Kashmir's culture and historical fabric. Tell us a little bit about your connection to the author and tell us how and what you got inspired to take on this translation project. And what does this book really mean to you personally?
The book means a lot to me personally, and it means a lot more today than it did a while ago, or even when the writer, who happens to be my uncle, he was my mother's brother. I didn't know his writings when he was alive. He died in 2009. And so in some sense, this has been a journey into my own past, into my own family, as I had started reading these stories, or got people to read them to me because I couldn't read the script initially, and started thinking about what he was writing. So it's he was one of the foremost short story writers and playwrights from that part of the world. It's very well known, got the Sahitya Academy Award in 2005 for his collection of, for one collection of stories. But again, going back to what we discussed about Words Without Borders, Kashmir and Kashmiri remains a
Mm-hmm.
marginalized language. So you have very good writers from these parts of the world, but they don't get the exposure. They don't, or they're not read in a way that they should be. I mean, these are Kaul being one. There's other writers from that area and other writers from around the world who are first-rate writers. You
Mm-hmm.
know, their mastery of their craft, their mastery of their language, their mastery of fiction writing is superb, second to none. But even if you take Kashmiri, even within India, Kaul is not well known at all. I mean, yes, he got the Sahitya Academy Award, and he translated his own stories into Hindi, so that got him some readership. But again, Hindi is one of several languages in India, right? I mean, if you're a Bengali speaker or a Tamil speaker or a Kannada speaker, you're not going to be exposed to this literature. And so it remains a conundrum that we're all trying to solve at Words Without Borders, how to get the best of everything to everyone. And that was not why I started to work on Kaul. It was purely out of a desire to get to know him and his writings better. And this project was germinating in my head for about 10 years, and I had no ability to start work on it. Because I was hindered by my inability to read the script that he writes, and he wrote in Nastaliq, not in Devanagari. And so I always thought I'm going to have someone else translate these stories. I'm not going to be able to do them. So when when it came time to kind of flesh out the project, I was working with another entity that I support in India, which is the Sangam House Writers Residency in
Mm-hmm.
Bangalore. And talking to people there and talking to the people who run it, I realized that it was potentially we could do something with the call stories. And they helped me find a few younger people who can read Nastaliq and who are well versed in Kashmiri literature and the language. And as I was kind of working with them initially, um, the project was again one of those remarkable things. It's amazing that it actually came to fruition because we couldn't find the original text. There was only one extant copy in the library and was in pretty bad shape, and that got photocopied and circulated to a bunch of people, Call's peers and colleagues, to help us select the stories. He wrote about 43 or 44 short stories.
Wow.
In 4 collections, and the Archipelago collection in the US and the HarperCollins collection in India features about 7 to 18 of those stories. So there's a lot of stories that we didn't get around to translating. But as I was fleshing out the project and talking to these people, I realized that I would not be able to help them unless I could hear the stories I'd heard these stories from my father, who reads the script and knew Call very well. But I needed to hear I needed to become familiar with the selection of stories that we had done. And so we had those stories recorded by native Kashmiri speakers. My spoken Kashmiri is fluent. I just can't read the script. So when I started listening to these stories and listening to them incessantly, day after day after day, I realized I can translate. I don't need to be able to read the script. I can translate. And the script, almost because he was a playwright, he has a very strong oral quality.
Mm-hmm.
The stories, it's almost like plays you get into when you're reading his stories. And so all of us started to work with both the script and the audio recordings. And the audio, when you're listening to something, it engages different parts of your brain than when you're reading. For me, it helped me understand the nuances of his language. It helped me understand the cadences better. It helped me understand why he was using certain words in certain places, which I don't think. And my collaborators, my co-translators agreed with me that they would have probably missed some of this if they had just stuck with the written text.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what got us started, was this, again, another adventure. It was a collaborative translation, of which there are not many, very few. And it was a translation based off of audio and text, of which there are very few. And again, it was the first of its kind in some sense, certainly for Kashmiri. And we just delved into this. Unfortunately, the pandemic happened around the same time. And instead of working on it in person, we found ourselves confined to working on these translations over Zoom for 2 years.
Wow.
And so there were a lot of very interesting facets to this translation, but the book did come together. And I think it came together really well. The translations have been well received both in India and in the US, gotten good critical reviews. But I think also importantly, what it did for me was to, after all the turmoil and the years of not being in Kashmir, which has been a very long time, it brought me back into touch with people who've actually lived there and lived through the reality of the last 20, 30 years. And it created some special bonds that still exist. So that's why it's very meaningful to me, not only just because of the translation that was achieved, but also because of my own journey as this translation was being done.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And, sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking, Call's writing captures the essence of Kashmiri life, right? While tackling universal themes like exile, resilience, identity. It must have been really, really challenging, for you, and then relate to it, and then translate. But then I'm thinking in my head, how did you make sure you're preserving the voice of the author in your translation? I think that's the hardest part for anyone who is translating somebody else's work. I think that's the hardest part. How did you make sure you are? I think one thing I'm thinking in my head is, you're related, he's your uncle, right? So there is some bond already there. You kind of have the context, you understand where he comes from. But then again, I'm like, whatever was he thinking, whatever he just put on paper, how did you do justice to that while translating all that complex work?
I've been thinking about it's an interesting question, and one that comes up often in translation workshops, and people who do this for a living, which I don't. This is my first translation. But I go back to what I said about Garcia Marquez. Are we really reading Garcia Marquez, or are we reading the translator of his works? And when you talk to certain authors about how they feel about their translators and the works that get translated, you get the entire spectrum of feelings. You get authors who will not have anything to do with the translation, will not even meet with the translator. It's totally hands off because they don't view it. They view it as a separate book. It's a separate book. It's a separate writer.
Oh.
And then you get translators who are authors who are intimately involved with the translator and want to view each draft and have suggestions and perhaps become impediments to the translators working on their work. So you get the entire spectrum. I have come to believe that they talk about lost in translation, found in translation. I've come to believe that every translator adds something to the original work. If you were to just take that work and just transliterate it, I mean, that literally take each word and then just put it down in a different language, that's not a literary translation. A literary translation has to capture not only the essence of the original, which obviously is what attracts you to that book in the first place, but it also has to keep the reader of the translation in mind. So it has to keep the language that you're translating into in mind, and what that reader is expecting, and what will keep that reader involved and engaged. So you could translate word for word, but it could end up being something that doesn't engage the target language reader, because let's go back to English. I say, yeah, no one writes like this in English. It's hard to read, it's hard to sustain. So I think a lot goes into the translator's role is not minimal. It's not just taking one sentence and translating it. It's keeping in mind how the whole has to fit together without losing the essence of the book. And as you said, for Kaul, for me, it was maybe a little bit easier because not only did I know the man and his milieu and his surroundings, and I also knew from some of the stories the characters that must have influenced those stories, because some of them, from the family and from the neighborhood, and I could see how his mind must have been working. I knew actual incidents, or I was told later, actual incidents by his son, my cousin, and I could see how he had used those actual incidents and translated them into his work. And it's fascinating because, a writer writes from their own life. I firmly believe that. And to know how this writer's life rolled out and how he used that as material for his writings gave me a completely different insight, which I was lucky to have because I knew him and the family. But it's still a very difficult thing to do. It comes down to basically a lot of decisions. Do you include this word? Do you not include this? How do you exactly translate this word word or this sentence. And I think prior translators of Kaul, who had translated him into English, mostly his colleagues, had worked from a different sense of the English language. It wasn't. It was much more archaic, I think, and they tried to sanitize some of Kaul's work in the sense that you and I both know Kashmiri is full of a lot of very colorful words and phrases, and
Mm-hmm.
Kaul uses them a lot.
Wow.
And they did not get translated, or they did not get translated well. So it was an attempt to also, and I think this happens with writers are lucky, this happens with them, to take a text, take it out of its time and modernize it, make it more accessible to a contemporary reader. You know,
Yeah.
that's why translations get redone. A 19th century or an early 20th century reader of Tolstoy is not the same as a reader today.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, fresh translations may be called for, maybe not. I'm just picking that as an example.
Mm-hmm.
But given given the recent history of Kashmir, or you know, more than recent history of Kashmir, I was really concerned that this speak to contemporary readers and contemporary young people in Kashmir and outside. And so it was important to do a fresh set of translations and to find younger co-translators who could help me bridge some of those gaps. And it was a fascinating project. I mean, I wish I could do it all over again.
You might, who knows, but not all over again, but something else. So you said you, so there are so many things I can talk about. One, that, you already had a view in the author's life, right? You already kind of have had a context of who he is talking about, who are these characters, what are these stories, and then connection to Kashmiri language. Yet you had to take help of other folks to translate the work. Um, so and then COVID hit, right? So I'm just thinking, how did you guys collaborate? Whether it was on Zoom or in person, how did you collaborate with your fellow translators to ensure that it's like cohesive and like authentic rendering of stories happen? Was it three of you or just two of you?
No, it's four of us.
Four of us. Oh my God, that
Yeah,
makes
well,
it all
yeah,
the more
the fourth
complex.
person kind of didn't stay all the way through, but yes, it was four of us. Yeah.
So how did that cohesion happen? How did you just make sense of this whole thing?
Well, again, it was a bit of trial and error, like, because no one had actually ever done anything like this. And so initially we decided we would take these 17, 18 stories and, share them. You do four, I'll do four, I'll do three. That's how it started. But then something happened along the way. I think as we were turning in, reading each other's first drafts, um, a holistic conversation started. I have no other word for it, but then that conversation amongst ourselves where we were debating um, each other's use of words, each other's use of expressions, each other's understanding of that text. And we were constantly checking the audios against, because you have to remember the written books that we had, the texts were not in very good shape, and sometimes we couldn't really, Kashmiri having those strange diacritics and strange sounds, you couldn't really tell. One little squiggle somewhere could change the meaning of a word. And so there were not too many, but there were parts where we were sort of saying, this is what it must say, this is what it has to mean, without knowing authentically that that was what it was. And out of those conversations came drafts that we were all contributing to equally. And that's when we realized that we shouldn't work on individual stories, but we should work, each one of us should work on all the stories and bring them together. I mean, there was first drafts done by some people, but then that first draft was just purely that. There was no ownership, there was no proprietary feeling about it. It was just presented to the group, and then we kind of took it apart, word by word, sentence by sentence, and then put it back together again. And
Wow.
that was a long process, but I think that was what took us deeper into the text and gave us a better understanding of what we were reading and hearing and thinking. And obviously, once it was, because someone said to me, but finished text read like one voice. It doesn't read like four voices. And I think that's where, when everything was done, I went through each of the stories myself to just kind of sort of clean up, to make sure that it was reading well in English. And then we had excellent editors, both in India and in New York, and who went through everything again with a fine-tooth comb. So it was a result of more than four people collaborating, which every book is. The editors were very, very seminal to the final text.
Nice. Um, Now, thinking about the book, do you think this translation is meant for anybody, or do you think it's meant for a particular section of uh, readers, people who read this kind of literature, or do you think it's something that everybody can relate to? In essence, what I'm asking is, what do you hope readers will take away from For Now It's Night?
Well, it's obviously a literary text, so it's not a bestseller or a thriller, or
Mm-hmm.
it'll appeal to certain kinds of readers, but it'll appeal to those readers beyond borders. It won't just appeal to Kashmiri readers or Indian readers. It should appeal to readers who read, literature of exile, literature of displacement, but it should also appeal to readers who are interested in that part of the world and want to get a better understanding. Because honestly, history lessons or politics doesn't give you an understanding of a region. It's reading literature from the region and what moves the people, what compels them to write, that helps you understand. So it should appeal to anyone who's interested in Kashmir, but it should also appeal to anyone who's interested in good literature and short fiction. These are short stories. And Kashmir is so much in the headlines all the time for
Mm-hmm.
different reasons, and to find a way of getting into the hearts and minds of Kashmiris, Hindus and Muslims, because the writer talks about both in his stories, to get into their hearts and minds and see what they're thinking through this book is something that should appeal to a lot of people.
Awesome. I think this is going to illuminate history, culture, and human connection, across the globe. And, speaking of connection, I'm excited to kind of think that this conversation doesn't end here. I think it'll be great to have your co-translators also kind of come in on the podcast and talk about their perspective, because I think you have one view of Words Without Borders, about Hari Krishna Kaul, about For Now It's Night. I just am intrigued by the thought of what are they seeing, what are they thinking. I think this has been an incredibly rich and enlightening conversation, Kalpana. Your professional journey, your advocacy for global literature, and your dedication to preserving and sharing stories of Kashmir is just so deeply inspiring. And obviously, it's Kashmir, so it's just so dear to my heart as well. So I'm kind of biased here. But I think we have only scratched the surface. How about in the next episode, we continue this conversation with your collaborators on how this translation work kind of came into being, and how it came to fruition. um, I think I can't wait to hear their perspective on this incredible project and explore even more layers of Call's work.
I think that would be very interesting, Neetu, and thank you for suggesting that. I'm sure they would really enjoy that, and to be continued.
Yeah. To our listeners, if you haven't yet picked up a copy of For Now It's Night, please do that. It's a work of art that invites you into the heart of Kashmir while resonating far beyond the borders. And don't forget to subscribe to the Inclusive Insights podcast. Thank you, Kalpana, for joining us today. It's been an absolute privilege. And to our audience, stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you next time with the co authors and with Kalpana. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Neetu. This has been amazingly interesting.